It was a cold December night in 2009, the kind of night where the city lights glow against the winter air. And for 24-year-old Rebecca Koster, it was supposed to be just another evening out with friends, filled with laughter, music, and the promise of fun. But that night would become the line that split her story in two, the night that changed everything forever, not only for Rebecca, but also for her family who loved her beyond words. In the hours that followed, a vibrant young woman who had dreams, plans, and a life ahead of her would vanish into the shadows, and days later, the chilling truth would break the hearts of all who searched for her. What unfolded was a story of betrayal, lies, and unimaginable cruelty, a case that would grip the attention of both New York and Connecticut as investigators followed a trail of evidence leading them into a nightmare. In Chapter 7, we will examine the tragic story of Rebecca Koster. Rebecca Koster was just 24 years old, a Long Island girl full of energy, warmth, and kindness, the kind of person whose smile could light up any room she walked into. She was known by her family and friends as someone who cared deeply for the people around her, always ready to share a laugh or lend a hand. Rebecca had dreams like any young woman her age. She wanted to build a future for herself, and though she was still figuring out her exact path, she carried a sense of hope and determination that made those close to her believe she would succeed in whatever she chose. Her relationship with her mother, Barbara, was especially close. They shared an unbreakable bond, and Barbara often described her daughter as not just family, but also her best friend. Rebecca loved the little joys of life, from spending time with friends to simply being with those she loved, and it was this everyday brightness that made her sudden loss so devastating. On the night of December 3, 2009, Rebecca stepped out of her house like so many young people do, ready for a simple night of fun with her friends. It was not supposed to be anything extraordinary, just a few drinks, some music, a chance to laugh and relax after a long week. Together, she and her friends made their way to a couple of local bars, the kinds of places filled with warmth and noise where everyone seems to know someone, and the evening moves in a blur of conversations, dancing, and playful banter. Those who were there later remembered Rebecca as the kind of person who stood out, not because she demanded attention, but because she carried herself with ease, smiling, joking, and even flirting a little in the carefree way a 24-year-old might on a night out. As the hours slipped past midnight, Rebecca was last seen leaving in the company of a man she knew, someone who did not cause suspicion at the time because she appeared comfortable around him. But not long after, the very last text message was sent from Rebecca's phone, a message that would later weigh heavily on her mother. At first it looked like an ordinary update, yet when reread later it felt off, almost as if the words were not entirely hers, and it marked the final time her phone was ever used. When the next morning arrived, the world inside Rebecca's home already felt different. Her mother, Barbara, who was used to hearing from her daughter regularly, noticed the silence immediately. There was no cheerful call, no casual text, none of the little gestures that usually came as a sign of safety and normalcy. At first, Barbara tried to calm herself with explanations, telling herself maybe Rebecca had fallen asleep late, maybe she had misplaced her phone, or maybe she was simply caught up with friends. But as the hours stretched into late morning, that thin layer of denial began to collapse. Barbara's instincts told her something was wrong, and those instincts only sharpened when phone calls to Rebecca went unanswered. Soon the family was reaching out to her friends, asking if anyone had seen her at the bars, retracing what they could of her last known steps. Yet every answer led to another question, and every silence deepened the fear that something terrible had already happened. As the hours of searching stretched into days, detectives knew they needed something solid to work with, so they turned to the surveillance cameras from the bars where Rebecca had been that night. The footage, though grainy, painted a telling picture. It showed Rebecca laughing and moving easily through the crowd, clearly enjoying herself, before walking out with a man who seemed to know her well enough that she trusted him. That man was quickly labeled by police as the mystery man because in that moment he became the very last person confirmed to be with her before she vanished. The footage soon led to his identification. Evans Ganthier, an acquaintance of Rebecca's. What made the discovery even more chilling was that, during that night, Ganthier had written down a phone number, and that small but important detail tied him directly to Rebecca's final movements. To investigators, it was no longer just a coincidence that she left with him. It was a turning point in the investigation. The images of Rebecca smiling beside Ganthier would later haunt those who watched them, because they showed a young woman stepping unknowingly into the company of the man who had become the focus of one of Long Island's most disturbing murder cases. While investigators built their timeline, one detail kept tugging at Rebecca's mother, Barbara, with a weight that would not go away. It was the last text message that had come from Rebecca's phone. At first glance, it looked like a casual check-in, but Barbara knew her daughter's voice, and this message simply did not sound like her. The words felt cold, wrong, almost staged, and soon detectives began to suspect exactly what Barbara feared, that the texts were not written by Rebecca at all, but by someone else trying to cover their tracks. This suspicion turned the case darker and made the search more urgent. Investigators used phone records and tips to track Ganthier's movements, which eventually pointed them toward an area in Comac. The search there was exhaustive, with officers and volunteers moving through fields, brush, and wooded ground, calling her name, hoping against hope for a miracle but bracing themselves for the possibility of something far worse. Each new discovery, small belongings, fragments of evidence, tightened the noose around Ganthier, but also deepened the family's despair. For Barbara, every moment without answers was torture, and those fake messages twisted the pain further, because they were a cruel reminder that someone was deliberately trying to deceive her, while her daughter's fate remained hidden in the shadows. The search for Rebecca stretched on painfully, and with each passing day her family clung desperately to any sign of hope. But then, far from Long Island, in the quiet woods of North Stonington, Connecticut, something was discovered that would change everything forever. It was December 2009 when a hunter, moving through a secluded patch of land, stumbled upon something he never expected: the burned and bound remains of a young woman lying abandoned in the brush. The sight was horrifying, the ground scarred by fire where someone had clearly tried to erase every trace of what had happened. But even flames could not completely destroy the truth that was left behind. For the authorities in Connecticut, this was a mystery victim at first, a Jane Doe with no name, but the violent condition of the remains told them it was no ordinary case. Soon detectives on Long Island were notified, and immediately their hearts sank, because the details matched far too closely with the missing woman they had been searching for since early December. As investigators carefully combed the area, gathering every possible fragment of evidence, one thing became clear: this was not a random tragedy. It was a deliberate act of cruelty, and someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide it. Families of missing women waited for confirmation, but for Rebecca's mother, Barbara, the fear that had been growing inside her was about to be confirmed in the most devastating way. The body was taken to the medical examiner's office, and from the very beginning, it was clear that this would be no easy process. The fire had done severe damage, making a simple visual identification impossible, but investigators had another way to be sure. They turned to dental records, carefully comparing the teeth of the remains with those of Rebecca, and when the match came back positive, the truth could no longer be held at bay. The Jane Doe in the woods was Rebecca Koster. For her family, the confirmation was a crushing blow. The small thread of hope that she might still come home was cut forever, and all that remained was unbearable grief. The autopsy revealed more details, showing that Rebecca had suffered a fatal stab wound before her body was set on fire. It was a chilling discovery, one that proved her death had been both violent and intentional. With Rebecca's identity confirmed, detectives knew the search had shifted from missing person to homicide, and their focus turned to piecing together every movement of that terrible night. The first real lead came from her cell phone records, which showed calls and texts that placed her with Evans Ganthier. the man she had gone out with after leaving her friends behind. Investigators dug deeper and uncovered a trail that led across state lines. Surveillance footage revealed Ganthier boarding the Cross-Sound ferry to Connecticut, and not long after, driving his SUV through areas close to where Rebecca's remains would later be discovered. The SUV itself became the next major breakthrough. When detectives examined the vehicle, their worst suspicions were confirmed. Hidden beneath the surface, traces of blood were found, later confirmed to be Rebecca's through DNA testing. To investigators, the picture was becoming clearer with each step. Rebecca had been in that vehicle, violence had occurred inside, and Ganthier's journey to Connecticut was no coincidence. Every detail was stacking up against him, and it was now only a matter of pressing him for the truth. What happened next, however, showed just how twisted and inconsistent his story would become once he was cornered. When Ganthier was finally brought in, detectives pressed him with the evidence, and after hours of questioning, he began to speak. But instead of a clear and honest account, what he offered was a disturbing and almost unbelievable explanation. He admitted that Rebecca had died while with him, but insisted it had not been planned. According to his story, there had been an argument, tempers rose, and in the heat of the moment, he claimed he struck her with a dumbbell, causing her death. To investigators, the dumbbell story was riddled with problems. The brutality of her injuries and the manner in which her body was burned and hidden did not align with an act of sudden rage. Instead, it suggested a deliberate effort to cover up a calculated crime. Ganthier described driving to Connecticut, dumping Rebecca's body, and setting it on fire to destroy evidence, but he painted it as a desperate mistake rather than a planned murder. Detectives, however, believed otherwise. To them, the lies and half-truths in his confession only highlighted his guilt. The details he left out, the inconsistencies in his timeline, and the sheer cruelty of his actions told a far darker story. What began as his attempt to lessen the blame only deepened the case against him. After Ganthier's strange confession and the mounting evidence against him, investigators knew they had enough to move forward. And very soon, he was arrested and charged with second-degree murder, along with arson and evidence tampering. From that moment, the story of Rebecca Koster shifted from the dark mystery of her disappearance to the long and painful journey through the justice system. In court, the prosecutors carefully built their case step by step, showing how the phone records connected Rebecca directly to Ganthier, how the ferry trip placed him near the site where her body was found, and how the blood in his SUV linked him beyond any doubt to her death. They reminded the jury that this was not an accident, because someone who panics does not drive across state lines, burn a body, and then send cruel text messages to buy time. The defense tried to argue that Rebecca's death was the result of an argument that got out of control, but the jury was not convinced. In 2012, the verdict came down. Guilty on all major counts. Ganthier was sentenced to 25 years to life, a decision that gave the Koster family justice, though never true healing. While the courtroom gave answers and a sentence, the real story outside those walls was one of unbearable grief. Rebecca's family had lived through the days of panic, when they still hoped she might come home, only to discover that the messages they thought were from her were actually written by the man who had already taken her life. Those cruel texts became known as part of a twisted game, a way for Ganthier to trick them into waiting and wondering while he tried to cover his tracks. For her parents, her friends, and everyone who loved her, that knowledge was like a second wound, because it showed not only violence, but also cold-hearted manipulation. They remembered Rebecca as a young woman who filled every space with light and laughter, and now every gathering carried the heavy silence of her absence. The guilty verdict and the long sentence offered some measure of justice, but no courtroom could erase the heartbreak of knowing her future was stolen in such a senseless and brutal way. Once the trial ended, Evans Ganthier was taken to a New York State prison where he began serving his sentence of 25 years to life. From behind bars, he tried to push back against the outcome, filing appeals and questioning the way evidence had been handled and how his confession was used. Each time the courts reviewed the case, and each time they stood by the original verdict, reinforcing that the evidence was strong and the conviction was fair. For the Koster family, Every new appeal was another painful reminder that the story was not fully behind them, forcing them to hear once again the details of Rebecca's final hours. Ganthia remains in prison to this day, with the possibility of parole only many years in the future. But for those who loved Rebecca, no legal update can ever change the truth that she is gone, and that her story is a permanent scar carried by everyone who knew her. Thank you for watching this chapter to the end. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. We would love to hear your feedback. If you want more true crime stories told with care and detail, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. Stay safe, and we will see you in the next chapter.